As above, so below.
And as many of you know, I study meaningful coincidences. And if you want to talk with other people about meaningful coincidences, please go to thecoincidenceproject.net. It's a nonprofit that I founded, and go to the section that says participate, and you can register for the Coincidence Cafe, which meets every Saturday, every third Saturday of the month, from 11 to 12:30, 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. And what we do is tell each other coincidence stories, and usually there's a theme to them. And funny things happen when people get put in the small groups. We do an introduction in a small group, and funny coincidences happen, which then get reported to the larger group. If you have not purchased my book, please consider doing it. It's one of the books that does an overlook of meaningful coincidences, including synchronicity and serendipity. You can get it any place you buy books. My story for today is a parallel between what happened with my father and me and which happened to somebody else, almost the same thing. Now, I've studied simulpathity, that is the experience of the pain of a loved one at a distance, and that began with my experience at age 31 in San Francisco. I was choking uncontrollably, and I found out the next day that my father, 3,000 miles away, was choking on his own blood and dying. So we were experiencing something similar around the same time. And my research and other people's research suggests this is not an uncommon weird experience. So a person who was recently on my podcast, Terje Simonsen from Norway, told me that one morning a friend of his had awoken and felt his palatine uvula, the little thing hanging down in the back of your throat, expanding so much that it nearly choked him. It was the first and the last time he had ever experienced something like this. And later that day, he found that at that very moment that he was choking, his father had fallen in the local river and died by drowning, choking by water. So it's always comforting and it's a negative experience, but comforting to know that other people experience weird things that I do and that you do. And that's one of the values of my book. That's one of the values of coming to the Coincidence Cafe. You find that you're not alone in these weird experiences. Our guest today is Roland McCratty. He is, or McCratty. How should I say it? McCratty?
McCratty, yeah.
McCratty, sorry. Roland McCratty, who is a PhD and Director of Research at the Institute of HeartMath. Research interests of his include physiology of emotion, intuition, and optimal functioning. His work focuses on the mechanisms by which emotions influence cognitive processes, behavior, social harmony, and health, as well as the global interconnectivity between people and the Earth's energetic systems. I raise my voice here because that's so important. The global interconnectivity between people, that's you and me, and the Earth's energetic systems. And I will also include the plants and animals that are here with us as well. He has been the principal investigator in numerous research studies examining the outcomes of positive emotion focused interventions and heart rhythm coherence feedback, which we will discuss in diverse organizational and educational settings, as well as in various clinical populations. He's been featured in a number of documentary films, such as I Am the Truth, I Am the Truth, The Joy of Socks Move, The Power of the Heart, Solar Revolution, and The Living Matrix, among other. Roland, it's so good to have you here because you are an excellent representative of HeartMath and its research, and you're as the head or director of research. And we're going to talk about HeartMath And with that, I'm going to talk about trees, but please start off telling us a coincidence story.
Um, well, I call them synchronicities. I think you would probably not have a problem with that.
No, it's synchronicity is, in my view, one form of meaningful coincidence.
Yeah. And to be honest, Bernard, you used the word weird. I don't find them weird at all. In fact, I expect them, I cultivate them, I appreciate them, and it's become a way of life for me.
Wonderful. That's what I want to have happen, to help normalize these things. Thank you.
Yeah. So I mean, there's so many, in a way, I'll say small stories. For me, I really do expect them. I believe I create them, and as we all do, from my perspective. And one of the things that we hear so much from people who have gone through our trainings, well, it's probably millions now, but of people, that is that they talk about, after I'll just say coherence training, how to get our physiological systems into a more coherent state, that their intuition's like on steroids. And then the second thing they usually say, it's in synchronicities have greatly increased, and I can certainly testify to that. And I believe that's because we are following our inner intuitive signals, that we end up at the right place, the right time, or synchronicities or coincidences, which I don't particularly care for that term, but to occur in our life. I mean, I had one this morning, so
Good.
I'm in our, give a little background here, and in our research, I'm a psychophysiologist, but having to branch into many other fields that are related, like you mentioned, human earth relationships, so having to learn geophysics and a whole lot of other new topics, nonlinear approaches to research and so on. And so I just received a paper today, which was exactly answered a question that I've been trying to figure out of the blue from a friend that I haven't talked to in probably 5 years. That was exactly what I needed. Of a question that I was thinking about a couple of days ago that I needed, so this is so common for me that, anyway.
I'm laughing because I love the combination of, like, usually it's thinking of a friend and they contact you. And then the other one is, I need information, and it shows up without my doing anything. And you had a nice combo of the two of them. Not that you thought of that friend, but he hadn't contacted you in a while. So that's why I'm laughing. I like when they have some overlap with two separate types of coincidences. And please use synchronicity if you want to, because a lot of people do. I just use coincidence because I want to include serendipity and simulpathity and seriality in the whole umbrella. But
That's
synchronicity
fine.
covers all of them for many people. So we'll continue with that. Words are important. You're academic-y, I'm academically, so we'll face that. But the fact that you're normalizing them for us, that's part of my job, is to help do what you experience. These are normal parts of your life.
Indeed. So in our work, maybe just to help unpack that a little bit more.
Please do.
It's kind of the cart before the horse a little bit here, but due to so many people, and a lot of my experience and a lot of others of the founders, I would say, of the HeartMath system, that following our own inner guidance system, our intuition, is really part of it. That's kind of one of the goals of what we do. And so we embarked, this is going back to the 90s, on starting to really do lab-based research on intuition. And so, well, I'm going to try and tell this story in a more simple way here. What I've come to believe in my writings, I suggest that we have 3 types of intuition. And I think it's helpful to kind of set that stage. Otherwise, it gets all muddled, I think, because they are separate, distinct types. In the first, I, as many others, call implicit learning or implicit knowledge, which is the type of intuition based on the way our brain works. It's also called dual process theory. That I'll just keep this simple, that we've learned things, forgot we learned them, didn't know we learned them, but they're stored away in the brain in implicit or unconscious memories. We encounter a problem or an issue or a situation, and the brain's doing pattern matching to those past references. And we have the aha, the intuition, also called where this underlies what's often called expert knowledge as well. The nurse who can walk into a patient's room has been around the block and says, "Oh, this patient's going to code." I mean, there's many examples, other examples, but
there's Oscar the cat, which you probably know about him too, who could tell when people were about to die.
Yeah, that's a little different. That's in my
Okay.
second story.
Okay.
Anyway, a new nurse, that's newer on the job, standing next to her, says, "Well, how do you know that?" And then she said, "I don't know. I just know it." Right. But her brain's, doing pattern recognition there to something that she doesn't have conscious access to. And anyway, I won't say a lot more of that, but that's one type, and it's an important type.
Very.
Then the second type, we call it energetic sensitivity. And this is our nervous systems, I think about our nervous systems anyway, capacity to detect and respond, recognize and respond to very real, usually measurable signals in the environment. You ever felt like somebody was staring at you and you turn around and sure enough, somebody's staring at you? There's actually been a couple studies that showed that's a real thing. There are people who can feel earthquakes coming. We now know we can measure changes in the Earth's magnetic environment that precede earthquakes. So it's our sensitivity. And there's no question that our physiology is tuned into and sensitive to the magnetic environment we live in. That's a whole other story. But empathy, I would also put in this category, the ability to actually feel what somebody else is feeling. And that's probably a whole other dialogue and show, but we radiate measurable fields and our nervous system can detect and respond to those. That's why it feels good to be around some people and others not so much. And we have sayings in our language. We all know this, and if you experienced it, like the tension was so thick in the room, you could cut it with a knife and you could feel it, right? Well, we can. So that would be the energetic sensitivity category, that and many others. And then the third, I call non-local intuition, just because we don't have a better term for it yet. And these are the type of intuitions that you can't write off or explain away in the other two types. And sometimes they're intermixed. They usually have things to do with, the future, or at great distance. It can be so time or space. And some of the examples you just used in opening the dialogue today, what I would put in that category, right? We're thinking of the friend we haven't thought of in years, and then we get a phone call or a letter from them in the next day or two, or mothers who know their kids are in harm's way or up to no good, right? And they're on the other side of the town, the other side of the world, right? These types. So and within that type of intuition, I also talk about the connection to our own larger self, higher self, whatever language you want to use there. Which is, to me, is the big game intuition, that alignment.
And would you mind telling us what you mean by higher self? I think it's an important concept, and I use it as a way of explaining telepathy.
Okay, well, I would put telepathy actually in either energetic sensitivity, depending on whether it's local or in the non-local.
I agree with that. I mean, that's such an important distinction, that one. Yeah.
Which is very real, and it actually just a lot of these one sentences we're saying actually would probably deserve a whole hour dialogue about to go in depth. But so higher self, it would be a term that's often used to talk about I'll just say the energetic part of ourself, the parts that you can't put under a microscope. You can't put a thought under a microscope, or an emotion, or an intuition, right? But we know they exist. We experience them, and they also exist in terms of where my expertise would be in emotional physiology. And there's an energetic component or a vibrational component. So higher self would be in most people's thinking anyway, and certainly mine, is that vibrational part that exists in another, I'll just call it dimension of density for right now.
Dimension of density.
Yeah. Like Earth here where we are, it's a, we can beat on the table and it's kind of a dense level. Then you, just to keep it real simple, you would have air. That would be another type of less dense, but there's density.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So there's different layers of density. Water would be another level of density if you want to think it, within the 3D world here. But
I'd call it a gradient, or maybe just separate levels.
Yeah.
Which you can feel different densities in.
Yeah.
I can come down from a mountain and feel different densities in the air,
Right.
and they're layered. And I think you're talking about some of the same thing. Now, and now we're not talking about telepathy, but I have this idea that we have around us a mental atmosphere, which is a lighter density than maybe the air atmosphere that is also around us, and that we can communicate through this noosphere. Or what do you think of that idea?
Well, I think that's exactly right. So we let's put it this way. You're exactly right. I would agree with you. Let's put it that way. There's different levels and layers of vibrations that like the information travels through. So, for example, we all live within the magnetic field of the Earth, right? You can't escape it. Right? We all live in it, and as it turns out, a lot of the resonant frequencies or vibrations that are occurring in the fields we live in pretty much exactly overlap the primary rhythms in our physiology, in our heart rhythms, our brain rhythms, overlap these different vibrational frequencies. In my previous career, by the way, before I became a psychophysiologist, was communication engineering. I used to work for Motorola in the early days.
They go together. They really do.
Well, they really do. So it was, in hindsight, it was another synchronicity. I had that career to understand.
To do this one, this is a higher level of lesser density, you could say, than what you were doing before. Are you including the Schumann resonance in what you're talking about?
Schumann would be one of them. Yes. The other, there's 8 Schumann resonances. A lot of people get confused about that, don't do their homework. There's, well, boy, where do we focus in at here?
Well, we don't go too much. I was just asking, it's 7.8 plus the harmonics that go up further is what you're trying to say. But we won't have to go through the Schumann resonance right now, except to say that lightning creates a resonant field between the ionosphere and the Earth's crust.
In that cavity, yeah.
In that cavity, and the Schumann resonance hertz frequencies are very similar to where our brain frequencies are as well.
Yeah, all 8 Schumann resonances overlap human brainwave frequencies.
And we'll leave it at that, just to say that we grew up in this magnetic field, and it's in us, and that's one way I can understand it.
Yeah, we evolved in it. In fact, one of my, I've had the great fortune to have attracted a lot of really wonderful mentors in my life, my career, and that really helped my journey of passed away. One of them was Franz Hallberg. The name a lot of people wouldn't recognize, but everybody's heard of circadian rhythms. And Dr. Hallberg is the person who coined that term. Right?
Oh, that's fortunate. That's very fortunate.
Yeah.
Well, we have gotten off into the magnetic field around us as you're talking about the third form of intuition.
Right, but it's related to this because
yes.
Just based on what you said on your comment that Dr. Hallberg suggests, who spent a whole career, thousands of papers studying physiology and circadian rhythms and the things that affect circadian rhythms. And one of those things is the magnetic environment we live in. He's very deep into this. And in his later life, he passed away about 5-6 years ago now. He was very clear. He says we have the rhythms, or suggests that we have the biological rhythms we do in our brain, our hearts, our nervous systems, because we evolved in the rhythms of the Earth.
Good. I'm so glad to hear
us,
that.
but trees have the same rhythms. You asked, we're going to talk a little bit about trees, and most animals have the same rhythms. We all evolved in these fields. But it from one aspect, and within that non-local category, to get back to that third type, there are different levels and layers of intuition there. But from my perspective, it's not magic, these things we're talking about. I mean, magic is just stuff we don't understand the mechanism for yet. But it is kind of magical in another way. So what I'm suggesting in one of our projects called the Global Coherence Initiative, where we actually have, we have in fact, the only global Earth level magnetic monitoring system in the world. So we have magnetic sensing sites all around the world that are all synchronized and calibrated. So I have a lot of insight into what's going on with the magnetic environment. You know, and just for those listeners, by the way, I'll just do this real quick. About every 2 years, you know, there's a utter nonsense that tends to propagate through social media that the Schumann resonances are changing, and they try and tie it to the consciousness of the planet. You know, and there was one last year, the first time ever we've measured the Schumann resonance at 30 hertz or something. And I'm going, no, sorry. They've always been there. You just have a really, you know, low caliber magnetometer and happen to see it for the first time. Anyway.
That is, thank you. That is worth bringing up. I like 7.8 hertz and I want to stick with it.
Okay. 7.83.
Sorry, 0.3. Thank you.
And it actually has a half hertz day-night difference as well. And they also have seasonal variation amplitude.
As does the ionosphere day and night, but we'll just stay with 7.83 for now. Thank you.
Anyway, so what I'm suggesting is that we are all living within, and because of the overlap of the frequencies through resonance, basic physics, right? Resonance principles, that we are coupled, both energy and information, between us and the fields. So it's clearly the fields affect us. I mean, I just over here on one of my little shelves, I've got a stack of about a little over 2 feet high of papers that show how we are affected by changes in the field environment. And I'm suggesting it works both ways. We're also feeding into the field. And what tunes us, this is a whole other line of stuff, but that to the information that we receive, what tunes our resonant frequency, if you will, or the information that we receive is what we care about.
Explain that, please. I think I understand it.
Yeah, well, moms, right, tune into their kids. Right, not if moms were tuned into all the, you know, however many billion kids there are running around right now, what a mess that would be. So in other words, we just like in a radio receiver. I'm an old guy. I remember back when you used to have to turn knobs on radios.
Yeah.
You probably do too, right?
Yes, I do. I mean,
you're tuning, literally changing the resonance of the front end, what's called the front end of that receiver. So I mean, if you think about it, Bernard, right now, or maybe the listeners, where you're sitting now, where I'm sitting in, how many of these different vibrational, you know, things we can't see, of these magnetic vibrations are around you right now, around me? All the cell phone conversations going on, you know, around down the street, the TV transmitters, radio transmitters, communication systems going on, you know, the fire department, police department. So how do we get what we want out of that field? Like we just have a radio, let's just say, or a TV or a cell phone, all the same thing. Is you tune to the frequency of interest, and as soon as that you become resonant with that frequency, voila, you transfer the energy and information into your device, and you're having your conversation.
It's the tuning of the self to the desired resonance that is so intriguing here.
Yeah, and I'm just suggesting it's what we care about. You know, we see that in our lab-based studies. We have to care about something to get the signal. What's the link between caring about something and getting the right resonant frequency to line up with the thing in the magnetic field? Well, it's the information being carried in the field is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the information in the field. In order to get to that information, you have to don't you have to resonate with with the carrier of the information?
Yeah, right. Well, we're naturally, our physiology is naturally in resonance unless we're really stressed out with the vibrations and the basic vibrations in the field, which is carrying lots of information. So how do we fine tune to the information being carried by, just like a radio transmitter does, those fields?
Yeah.
That's all I'm suggesting. It's what we care about it. And moms and knowing their and being tuned into their kids is a great example. We care about our family, our kids. Now, this also happens. There's pretty good evidence and growing evidence that we form, I'll say, group fields. Like this could be a sports team or a leadership team or a work team, people who work together over time. If and one of the key things here, if there is a positive, I'll just say a positive emotional connection or some type of a bonding, a connection between people
It's vital.
And that's critical.
Yes.
To this. It forms a group field where information is shared amongst that group about the group dynamics.
Yeah.
Right. We're kind of getting way out there right now.
Well, no, we're in a way we're not. And I'll tell you why in a way we're not. I've just finished drafting a book about my own experiences of synchronicity through my life. And I'm going on to the next one, which I'm calling the psychosphere, or at least right now, and trying to understand this mental atmosphere, which you are now describing. Because what my question I've been asking is a little bit like yesterday. It's like, what is the makeup of the psychosphere, the way I'm thinking about it? And I know there's energy and information in the psychosphere, the way I think about it. And now you're describing it in much more concrete terms than I was able to have, that it's that magnetic field that has resonance in it with information in it that we can tune into. I've used the radio metaphor as well. So this fits with what I was looking for, just as that person contacted you today with what you were looking for.
Yeah. I mean, so we're all broadcasting into the field 24/7, especially our thoughts, but especially our emotions. So I call it the global information field.
Good.
I'm certainly not the first to suggest this. I mean, Jung suggested a similar thing. Ervin Laszlo, talks and writes a lot about this type of thing. Anyway, there are many.
The noosphere is the way I came across it with Teilhard de Chardin. My understanding of Jung is a little different from what you just described, because he doesn't get as concrete, but it's in the same direction.
Yeah, I must say he has the mechanism as concrete, but this idea of different people have called it different things.
Well, you are describing what it's made out of, and that's what I so much love and respect hearing from you. You're saying some of the same phrases I use, energy and information, but you're making it more concrete. It's less ethereal. It's like stuff that you're measuring. And that's, so thank you already for that part of what we're talking about. Now I want to be able to ask you one more in this direction. I go to dance on a regular basis twice a week, and it's kind of like do whatever you want kind of dance. And we create a localized energy information field there.
That would be like a group field that I'm talking about.
It's like the group. And what seems to happen is that if I think about it'd be fun to dance with somebody, that sometimes that person picks that up and it happens.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. As we form these group level fields, usually at an unconscious level, information, it's actually a holographic process, is shared amongst the group members. I mean, it's why, you think of really sports teams that are really in the flow, right? And it seems like there's some unseen communication going on. Well, there is.
There is.
Is what I'm saying. Or, I mean, there's classic examples, or extraordinary orchestras, right? You can, in fact,
excuse me for saying this, but you are bringing to this body with your information a sense of relaxation and deep appreciation for the words that you know so well and the experiences you've measured and are able to say. So this one human being appreciates very much, Roland, what you are saying. So thank you for me.
You're most welcome.
I'd like to maybe move over to the tree research you're talking about, you're doing, we haven't talked about. Um, the idea that there are energy information fields around everyone that's like existing. It could be rocks too. I don't know if you measure rocks, but there's probably something around rock. Is there something around rocks too?
Well, I mean, not that we measure. I mean, this would sound new agey, but it's actually true that everything's vibrating.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Most basic and fundamental level. So yeah, rocks have a vibrational field. Can we measure them? Well, I can't. You know, that it would take a level of instrumentation that, you know, I don't know that we have yet, other than destroying things to get at their vibration. But you know, when we talk about we have a field, well, certainly we have a field. And how do I know that? Well, I can measure.
Yeah.
And if we're talking now energetic, and we've shown that there's an energetic communication that's always on between people at an unseen level. Now, what I can, you know, let me just give you an example, Bernard, and then we'll go to your tree question. We put electrodes across your chest to measure your heartbeat. It's called the electrocardiogram, right? Or we stick electrodes on the brain to measure brain waves, the electroencephalograph. Well, it's called the electrocardiogram because we're literally measuring electrical current flow. So the electrodes see current flow. That's literally what they measure, the flow, just like the electricity flowing through the wires in your house. It's the same thing, right? Just a different, it's ions instead of blue. Anyway, whenever you have a flow of current, this physics 101, you generate a magnetic field. And one of the qualities of magnetic fields, electric fields and magnetic fields are different animals. We don't tend to think of that, but they're quite different. One of the properties of magnetic fields is they go through things. This is why cell phones work indoors, right? So if you don't believe me, stop using your cell phone indoors. And so when you have the beating heart, or, you know, a bunch of neurons getting together and oscillating, you create current flows and secondary, or not secondary, but magnetic fields. So you can measure the heart's magnetic field way outside the body. And you do that with a different instrument. It's called a magnetometer. So I can put a probe out here in space, you know, a few feet away from the body, and pick up the heart's field. And we've shown, it's all published in peer-reviewed publications for people that care about that field is carrying emotional information, probably a whole lot more, but for sure emotional state information. By the way, you can measure a brainwave about an inch away from the skull before you detect it. The heart, feet.
3 feet.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the sensitivity of today's. It goes farther than that. That's the sensitivity of the magnetometers, right? Used to be a couple of feet, you know. In fact, it's really interesting. Years ago, I don't hear this so much anymore. More people would say, well, that's nonsense. There's no such thing. And well, I've got one of the books on my bookshelf back here is a book on bioelectric magnetism. And within it is a drawing of the heart's field measured external to the body that was done in 1886. And they got it right. In fact, actually, you know, it's really interesting. And not anybody cares about this. I was at a museum before COVID in London, actually in the UK, and I ran across the original article that was in the museum that's in the book. So it's like kind of another coincidence or synchronicity.
Let's pause on this. We can go in a lot of different directions, but one of the things you said at the beginning was being in the right place at the right time. Mm-hmm. And that's following your intuition. Yeah. I've ended up calling that human internal GPS.
Yeah, I use the same term. It is that when we're really following and again, I would say this is our higher, I use the term our larger self. You know, is it vibrating in a different frequency?
Yeah, it's vibrating in a different frequency. And I'm suggesting it's vibrating in a different frequency above our heads in this magnetic field you're describing.
Well, I wouldn't quite go, I won't disagree with you, but I have a little different perspective. We live within the magnetic field. Yes, I'm all into that and measuring that. And there's also another level, a deeper level of, you know, whether you want to call it spirit, soul, yourself, larger self, that's another dimension past.
Yeah, I agree with that. And what I'm describing is in between the soul and where we are now.
Yeah, we call that the energetic heart.
Where is it localized in space?
Well, this is the problem when you start trying to localize holographic structural things. I'm not going to go there right now, but
Okay, let's say there's a problem there, and I'm curious, but we're not going to go into it anymore. But this human GPS has a curious ability of getting us to the right place at the right time,
right.
and we don't know usually that we're doing it. We're following something
that's
else, what you call intuition, and how we localize where the other place is and how we pathfind to that other place is a curiosity to me that I have not been able to answer.
Yeah, well, if you're following your inner GPS, then we end up at the right place at the right time.
And how does the inner GPS know how to be there, where it is, how to
Well,
get
because
there?
let's just say at our larger self, that's in another dimension of density. And that's the part, when people talk about, the part that doesn't die, say it simply.
Okay.
At that level, from my perspective, it really is a holographic reality that we live in. And, so some of my friends are like Jean Caravan and her book, The Cosmic Hologram, and Carl Pribram was one of my mentors, the holographic perception.
He was
theory.
down the hall from me at Stanford, and I've interviewed Jude. So yeah, I know
Okay,
I know your background a little bit.
Yeah, so in fact, I just interviewed Jude for a summit on coherence I'm doing. And so you knew Carl Pribram?
Well, I just know the name was on the door and that he was famous. And I introduced myself once to him, but I didn't really, and he was doing some stuff that I didn't understand. That's all I knew.
So Carl was one of my mentors. He's one of my favorite friends. He hung out a lot after he retired from being head of brain. For those that don't know the name, he was head of neuroscience at Stanford for his whole career, and then retired and then started labs in the East Coast and actually in Virginia. And he was teaching right up till he passed in his 90s. But Carl was he was one of my key mentors in a way. What I know about the brain, I learned from Carl, from Dr. Pribram.
This is so cool. It's so cool.
He was a regular here. He visited every year until he couldn't travel anymore and hung out usually a week or two here.
Wow. Marvelous, marvelous, marvelous. So I like where we differ in our conceptions. They're slightly overlapping, but there's a difference here, and it's educational for me. And I hope our audience, as we hear our slight differences and we talk about them. But let's do the tree thing.
You wanted to talk about trees.
I want to talk. Can we please talk about trees?
Yeah. All right. So a lot of what we've already talked about is actually relevant for the tree discussion, because before I go there, just for the viewers to know, our core research is really heart-brain communication and how we get the heart and brain aligned and how that improves so many things in our lives. And that's what we teach in our HeartMath programs. But we're also interested in global interconnectivity. And a lot of what we've been talking about is that. So that's why we have a global monitoring system to measure the resonant frequencies in the Earth's fields and these types of things. I'm actually suggesting, which I can't say is original to me, but it's a little far out for some in the conventional sciences, is that there's this two-way communication between humanity and the energetic fields of the Earth, the magnetic fields of the Earth, creating this global information field. So I'm saying that all living systems are interconnected by these fields. And I'm certainly not alone in that, or the first to suggest that, but crazy enough to think we can potentially measure it and prove it.
You got to be crazy in this business. That's good.
So all living systems, right? So trees, I make a great research participant. They stay put, and they really don't mind if we put a couple of electrodes in them. So that's what we're doing at global scale. Now there's a lot of just wonderful, I think, just fascinating research around trees. You probably are familiar with some of it. Suzanne Simard and her work, and Melissa, what's Melissa's last name, who showed mimosa plants have long-term memory. A lot of just really neat stuff going on about the biochemical communication pathways in trees and a new type of intelligence. In fact, it's fascinating to watch the debates going on, I'll call between the old guard and the new guard in the plant world.
Summarize that debate a little bit for our audience, especially with trees.
Yeah, I will. Let me, but before I
Right.
go there, let me just finish this thought. But what very little research has been done is the electrical life or the electrical activity of trees and plants. Right. So Cleve Baxter was one of the first to do that in his book, Secret Life of Plants, or the book about him. He was also a regular here, by the way, before he passed. The old guard, new guard. So what I'll just say the newer generation of plant biologists and plant researchers are showing is that there's an incredible intelligence that plants have. And they have they've been shown now 20 some sensory systems. They have all the same senses we do and a lot more, but they're really showing some of the most fascinating stuff. I think is that in the tree world anyway, that trees cooperate with each other, even across species. They support each other. In other words, it's not this competition, survival of the fittest thing. It's actually an amazing degree of cooperation that's going on, which is what I actually believe, a little sidetrack here, is why nature thrives. So if I had to say what's the main thing that nature does, is it thrives. I mean, it's amazing how, but it's what's being shown now is because of the cooperation. So Suzanne Simard's work shows that mother trees, for example, recognize and know their kin and support them. And it can communicate across, entire forests, basically, through the ground, and so on.
So if something's going on in one part of the forest, that wood wide web communicates it to the other trees.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And so on. And I can't pull in her last name right now. Melissa, I've actually had a few conversations with her, showed that it'll help come to me that mimosa plants have long-term memory. Right. I mean, she did experiments where you drop them and they close their leaves, and you do that a couple of times and they kind of get that there's not really going to hurt anything, that they're fine. They quit doing it and they can remember that for up to a month. Right. So they're saying there's a type of plant, there's an intelligence here, a distributed type of intelligence. And then we have to think of this in new ways. The old guard is saying, no, that's impossible, that you have to have neurons to have memory, to have intelligence, all these types of things. Right. So it's been quite this battle in a way that between the old and the new, and that's the way it seems to go in science.
It does.
And what we've learned, what we're have a lot of investment in, don't confuse me with the data my mind's made up. We don't want to expand it.
I've got that with synchronicity all over the place.
Yeah, but what I think, hopefully all of us will evolve, humanity, including scientists, to be a little more open, that because what the new is finding doesn't make the old wrong. Right. We're not, it's just the next level of understanding that, anyway, that goes on in every branch of science. And I think, in probably every sphere of humanity, but anyway, so the trees, to get back to trees, we're looking at the electrical rhythms of trees at a global scale to ask new questions. I'm gonna need to bring in another thing here to help maybe add to this. Is so in our interconnectivity research, we've also become the new home base for what's called the Global Consciousness Project. You might have heard of that. Roger Nielsen. I don't know if you might have even interviewed Roger in the past. I don't know.
No, I haven't.
So that is that was started about 25 years ago at Princeton, and based on a lot of research that showed that our consciousness, especially our emotions, where we place our attention, and especially if we feel something, can change the behavior of, it's called a random number generator. And for those that don't, that can sound complicated. Well, they kind of are, because it's really hard to make random numbers, truly random numbers. We use a quantum tunneling process for that. But the simple way to think of them is they're electronic coin flippers. All right. So if you flip it, if you get out a quarter or any kind of coin and flip it 100 times or 1,000 times, on average, you're going to get 50 heads, 50 tails, right? Random number generators are basically coin flippers. They just do it really fast. So in our new network, we flip the coin 10,000 times in a second, right? And you get, instead of heads and tails, it's ones and zeros. And what's been found is that when people feel something, and we have a strong emotion, that somehow I won't say interferes because that's the wrong word, but connects with and creates a type of coherence within those physical devices, so that they start flipping a bunch of ones in a row or a bunch of zeros, more than you would expect by random chance.
The key word is coherence.
Yeah, exactly. Now, where this really got fascinating, and this is what was behind the creation of the Global Consciousness Project so many years ago, was that when you have a bunch of these devices, and if you distribute them around the planet, that when something happens, usually a big media event around, it could be a terrorist attack like 9/11 or the death of Princess Diana, for example, these kinds of events that gather a lot of attention. Or it also happens on Earth Day, right, where you have lots of groups around the world, doing their meditations and prayers and things like this, or global peace days, or other organized large-scale meditations, and like Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, or a lot of pilgrimages in India. What you see is that the correlated behavior of these devices distributed around the earth, this is the key, become correlated. They start flipping ones or zeros at the same time in a correlated way.
And that's true of the trees you're talking about?
No.
No, okay.
That's a question.
You're talking about the Global Consciousness
Yeah,
Project
but I'm
with random number generators. Yeah,
yeah. So we see a global field effect. We call it the global consciousness field.
Yeah.
Which is I do think is interrelated to the magnetic domain, but that's another story. So trees give us now a living system to ask similar questions. So in other words, do trees globally respond in the same way these physical devices do? So we'll actually be correlating between those two. So our goal right now is to get 100 trees around that. We're almost there, being monitored. So it sends their electrical data back, and trees are pretty fascinating little creatures. They have, for example, we put electrodes in the trunk of a tree. We're measuring the voltages they produce are in the millivolt range. Right now, that may not sound like a lot, but that's the same level of voltage you measure from a human heartbeat. Right. So how in the heck are trees doing this? And so nobody really has a clear answer yet to that.
And sap flowing is not going to do it.
Sap flowing is not the answer. That's been ruled out. That's a lot that we know it's not sap flow. We've got some ideas now that are emerging on this, but on the mechanism. But what's more importantly is trees have very rich and dynamic electrical lives. They have circadian rhythms just like we do, and they're very dynamic. And we call them wow signals that you see now and then. It's that like, well, what the heck does this mean? And how does a tree do this? Right. So for example, what we're already seeing, and our goal is to have 100 trees around the earth, and we're almost there, is that it's very clear already that what is reflected in the electrical signal of a tree is reflecting decisions that the tree as a whole is making, as a whole being, and that decision is reflected in a very dramatic and fast change in the electrical activity, like it switched states, for example.
And what kind of decisions are the trees making?
Well, it could be to go into conservation of energy, stop growth, conserve energy, because you don't have the right nutrients or water or temperature available, for example. Or it could be to switch states from conservation of energy to, okay, now we're going to add growth and we're going to expand.
Well, since I'm sensitive to them, after a rainfall, when it's been dry, I can see how happy they are.
Yeah, sure. And you'll see that in their electrical activity.
Yeah, that's what I'm
yeah.
I can feel it, I can see it, and it can be measured. And that's, is there a magnetic field around trees as well?
Well, okay. So back to what I was saying earlier, anytime you have current flow, you create a magnetic field. And we're measuring current flows in the millivolt range. So you certainly have a magnetic field that is directly associated with those current flows.
But we don't know how that current is created. That's the difference.
Well, it has to be ultimately a biological process.
Yeah, but we
But,
don't know precisely what it is, but it's
Yeah.
there and it can be measured. And I assume that this magnetic field around trees can expand and contract.
Sure, it's gonna at least these conventional magnetic fields we're talking about, like biofields, like I was talking about with the hardware around a tree, is going to be directly proportional to the flow of current.
Okay, that's well, part of what I wanted to ask you about, I will ask you about now. I've had this relationship with these three trees for 10 or 12 years. And I was walking on a path and it's as if they stopped me, like a beam came across the path and I go, what? And I start having interactions with them. And over the years, I've had telepathic communications with them where they tell me stuff.
Mhm.
And I have to ask, I don't believe that you're really communicating with me. So we would challenge each other. But there was one time for sure where they planted an idea in my head and I felt like it came from outside of me. And a synchronicity confirmed it without going through the details of it, a few feet from where this thing happened. So I go up there and they like to have me sing to them. And this is what I'm asking you about. Among other things, is that they like to have me sing to them. And there's certain songs that they like. And they tell me which song they want me to sing. And I have to argue with them sometimes. I want to sing some other song. And they say, okay, but they like songs that have mountains and trees in them for some reason. I don't know why that would be. One of them is Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
Mm.
They love that one. And another song you probably don't know called The Mountain. And it's kind of a love song, but it's called The Mountain. And there's a mountain in the lyrics of it. So a friend of mine told me that they probably like it because that singing creates a vibrational tone that they can't create. And so they like that, having that differences.
You know, I maybe
What do you think? Yeah.
I would suggest, or I'll say my intuition is
Yes.
that trees like and respond to love. When we're feeling uplifting emotions, you know, whether that's appreciation, gratitude, you know, humility, these types of actual real energetic feelings, that there's sensitive to that. In fact, that's what the Global Tree Project is about, is asking that question. Do we see it at global scale?
Do we see what at a global scale?
So trees respond to
To
human emotions.
human, and particularly love is what you've mentioned.
Yeah. So that gets us in another area of our research, mostly that I would put in the social coherence side of things. So I divide our research into three primary buckets: personal coherence, social coherence, and global coherence.
Well, let me ask you about social coherence for a minute, because can you measure the magnetic fields between people as they shift and change?
In the right context, you can.
Which is
It's
what?
well, in a magnetically shielded room with
Yeah.
grid-based magnetometers and things like that.
Have you done that?
I haven't done it. I don't really need to, because we know, you know, and by the way, this magnetic field stuff, heart magnetic field, may sound wacky to people. Well, Stanford, for example, you said you were past Stanford, and most other teaching hospitals all around the world have devices sitting right there in their hospitals called MCGs, magnetocardiograms, that routinely, daily, right now, probably hundreds, if not thousands, of sensors that don't touch the body are being used in hospitals to measure the magnetic component of the heartbeat.
Good. So if
uh,
Stanford's doing it, that must mean something, as well as other places too. So it's there, it's measurable, it's usable clinically, and that's why it's being.
So what I was going to say is that we know, and there's reasons that you would look at the magnetic rather than the electric, but that we don't need to get into that, but you do clinically. But there is a direct correlation between the electrocardiogram and the magnetic field. We know what that is. I have done that work. Okay, as have many others.
Okay.
So I don't need to measure I can measure the ECG or the EEG and know exactly what the information in the field is.
Cool.
Right.
Cool.
So we do that in groups and things. A lot simpler, right? Once you know that relationship. Now, what are current kind of work is looking at physiological synchronization. And that's actually becoming kind of a hot new topic. There's a number of labs that are starting to get interested in this. So what in our case, we're a lot of people are looking at brainwave synchronization. You know, like when you put people in a lab and you have them, tap or do different things to create some type of a task that you'll see their brainwaves can synchronize. And some people are getting a little more creative and doing it in separate rooms and things, and which is cool, showing that a synchronization occurs. We're looking more at the heart because we're heart math. So heart rhythm synchronization, which I actually think is even more profound, and between people and also between Earth rhythms and us as well. And so what we're seeing is that it's very real, and we're even seeing it can occur non-locally, right? Which is surprising, but it happens. That one of the key aspects that determines whether people can literally get in sync or not, now I'm talking physiological synchronization, is back to that same thing that seems to be a common thread through so much of this, which is a positive emotional connection.
Yeah. So
you
essential.
You don't have to be husbands and wife and lovers, but you have to
No.
like each other. There has
Yeah.
to be a connection. Then we see synchronization within groups, right? Whether they're in the same room or even non-locally is what's starting.
Now, well, that's how it goes non-locally is my question.
Well, let's go back to how we started this conversation. If we're all connected to a larger magnetic field that's global in scale, and that is information, and what we care about or who we like is what tunes us to the field, the information in the field, we have a plausible, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not saying that living within the magnetic field of the Earth is the only way we're interconnected energetically, but it's one that we can test, and it's one that's very real.
It's very real. It's palpable, and I like the idea of palpable. I'd like to tell you a story. I think we've already described it, but at dance on Sunday, I was dancing with somebody who I've known for quite a while and danced with her sometimes. And some music came on that was like a merry-go-round music. And she says, "Oh, it's a merry-go-round." So we start pretending like we're riding on horses on the merry-go-round. And then she says, "Oh, the horses are running away off the carousel." So we're pretending like we're running away from while we're dancing. It's a dance thing. I don't remember what we did. So a friend of hers calls her up that morning, a friend of hers from California. So around the time we were doing the merry-go-round thing, her friend says, "I had a dream about you being on a carousel."
Mm-hmm.
There was a kind of playful wonder about that one that I really liked, but I think you've already explained how that might happen. But here's a third person involved, but it's really the two of them that had the connection.
I don't know why you're drawing this out of me. I haven't thought of this in a while, but it's another one of those synchronicity on steroids to me stories. And one of our heart map trainers, as it turns out, is in Brazil. And she has a practice of actually putting an electronic stethoscope on her heart to listen to her heartbeat as she does her coherence practices. So you can do it and you can actually hear the heart changing sounds. And so she likes to do that and sometimes records it. So that's the backdrop for this. And one of her friends, who I think is in Mexico, not down the street, dog that she was very attached to passed away. Right. So these were close friends. And I probably won't get all the details exactly right here, but the essence of the story is that when she was recording her heart, she heard what sounded like a dog barking in the recording of her heartbeat.
Wow.
And she played it to her friend. And the timing of it was exactly when the dog died. And the friend she played it to said that the bark sounds exactly like my dog. I actually have the recording. She sent it to me. You can actually hear a dog barking.
Now we're having to come to the end of our conversation, but it's those ones on steroids like that. Not I think of somebody and they call me. The carousel thing was pretty good. This is even more. Um, that they become to our ways of thinking, like the dog barking, a much lower probability event than we could ever imagine. And
Right.
it's these low probability events that are the keys to how stuff works. They are the clues.
Mhm.
And I wonder what did this story do for your thinking about your research?
Well, that one for me was, well, that's really cool. It didn't really, if I'm really honest, Bernard, it didn't change my thinking. I mean, these are things that I kind of already expect to be possible and real. I've seen too much in our own data um, to, I tend to, I'm the kind of scientist that follows the data,
Yeah, yeah.
whether it matches my theories and hypotheses or not. And in fact, it's been the unexpected findings that I would never have predicted or thought possible that have been the most fun and actually taken our research down completely new avenues I would never have thought of or expected.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the idea. That's good science.
Now, so you said you were at Stanford?
Yeah, I was a resident at psychiatry at Stanford.
Oh, at Science Psychiatry. You probably didn't know Bill Tiller then.
No.
He was head of material science there. He was another one of my mentors. And actually, after he retired, spent about 3 years here working in our lab. But he did anyway, Bill just recently passed away as well. Another one of these great scientists. I learned a lot from him as well. And one of those was is to not know what I know so much, but a certain kind of openness, and a
It's childhood curiosity still. It's like,
yeah,
what's going on around here?
yeah.
What is this?
So Bill was an interesting character because at Stanford he brought in multi-millions in funding, head of material science, and this is during the the emergence of Silicon Valley, and he was one of the pioneers of that. How you grow silicon, and all the stuff that was absolutely critical for that industry. So, but he also had a deep interest in what he called subtle energies, and these types of things, and actually built a subtle energy detector. Actually, gave it to me when he left Stanford, and so Stanford didn't like this, but they couldn't do anything with him, right? Because they had a department that's so. But, anyway,
What were the subtle energies he was measuring?
oh, lots of things. I mean, the things you're interested in, like can we influence things at a distance? So he had basically one of his coolest things. He did a lot of things, but it was basically a little thin cell about a quarter inch, and he tried different gases, xenon and different kinds of combinations. And then you put a high voltage, an AC high voltage on one side. He'd a little deposited gold plate on both sides, and the other side had basically a high voltage resistor and a counter coming off of that, so you could influence it and it would spark, across the gap because through the gas, and then you could count how many clicks it got by different types of intention. So you could intend to cause the device to do things or put it in different environments and see what happened.
They're trying to do a psychokinesis thing at the Division of Perceptual Studies here at the University of Virginia. And they're not coming up with stuff as clean as what you just described.
Oh yeah, that was you published that, and yeah, we're doing some in a way. It's not exactly the right. Well, right's not that's not the right word. It's similar, not exactly the same as what a random number generator is. And what Bill was onto was, which I think is exactly right, is that the interface between consciousness and the physical world, finding systems that needs the least amount of energy to move the system.
Which is basic to how things work. Yes.
Yeah. So like in this case, it's an avalanche effect, right? In the detector. The same thing in random number generators, because we use quantum tunneling as the source of our random numbers.
Oh, quantum tunneling. Maybe that's what I won't do that.
Well, but that's how our random number generators work, is we're actually driving electrons through a barrier they don't want to go through. So it's a quantum tunneling, because it's actually hard to make random numbers.
Yeah.
Because most things actually end up having some type of a predictability in them.
Yes.
So you need really quantum processes that are non-deterministic.
And tunneling
Tunneling is one of those things that we use for that.
Well, I'm going to end my side of this with the story with the dog barking, and it sounded just like the dog, because what it does for me is indicate how much information can be transmitted from one person to another. That and in the way it can manifest, to that the heart can register the sound of the dog barking that sounds just like the dog. I'm interested in the old thing, the telephones between minds, as the old book was about. I'm interested in how we communicate both emotions, as you are studying, and ideas, as you were studying, between and among people. I started with this as a therapist, feeling the energy fields between me and my patients, and I could feel them getting wider and narrower and diffuse and then focused. And I could feel it, guess what, with my heart, as well as with my skin. I could feel the changes on my skin. And I've been looking for, like Diogenes with my lantern, just for an honest guy who could tell me I can measure the interpersonal fields. And you told me how hard that is, and you're making approximations of that. So that'll be good enough for me right now. I knew we had to get people into a magnetically shielded room in order to be able to do it. And that's expensive, and it's a lot of stuff to do when you're doing it.
Yeah, it's a lot simpler though. I mean, we use things like this, right? Modern HRV recorders are cheap, relatively cheap. Stick them on. We have people wearing these for, in one study, 24 hours a day for 5 months. You know, to look at that interaction between the magnetic environment we live in. But we do the same thing in a group of people, right? So you can be monitoring a team or a group, you know, and you know, one thing that just as a psychiatrist you'd probably be interested in, what we're seeing in this new kind of emerging field of synchronization. There's some really cool stuff that's already been published, but the more in sync, or if we train people to get more in sync physiologically, right, with different techniques, that deepens that energetic connection, which then helps facilitate pro-social behaviors, better communication, you know, less of those separation barriers. So that's one of the things we're looking at now, on the flip side of that coin.
Roland, fantastic talking with you. Fantastic talking with you. Really, you are. I'm at the edge of what you're studying right now, and so I'm very glad to know the expansiveness and the detail that you are able to do, and I really appreciate being able to learn from you today, and I know our audience will as well. Is there anything you would like to end with that you would like our audience to know?
Well, one of the things I encourage people to do, based on the conversation we've had today, and this is really what our global coherence initiative is all about. And we didn't even get into our core work, which is how the heart and brain communicate, and how we really access that larger part of ourselves. But try and pause throughout the day, whenever you can, think of it, and just ask yourself, what am I feeding the field?
What am I what?
Feeding the field.
Feeding the field.
Feeding the field. Am I feeding my energetic system, which I'm radiating, I'm broadcasting, with things like compassion, care, kindness? Or am I feeding the field with vibrations of frustration or anxiety and feelings of overwhelm? Because it has profound effects on our own biology, but we're also affecting others around us.
Oh, yeah.
In measurable ways.
I get a kick out of walking into dance when I'm feeling really good and going for it and watching people come around me. It's the same idea.
Yeah, it is. So as enough of us take that self-responsibility for feeding the field more uplifting vibrations, so I'm going to use that word quite literally, it really helps move humanity forward, and certainly our own health and well-being.
That's a wonderful way to end our conversation. So thank you very much, Roland, for being with me today.
All right. Take care, everyone.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.